Clara stepped off the dusty wagon and into the sun-bleached courtyard of the Sagebrush Hollow Church. The wooden structure, its walls stained by years of desert dust and fervent prayer, stood silent witness to countless town secrets. Today, it would bear another secret, one born by a young bride-to-be whose delicate hope wore with the visible scars etched upon her face. Clara's heart thumped like the distant beat of a drum as she adjusted her simple, self-stitched dress and carefully clasped a worn veil over her features. Although the fabric was soft and fragile, it could not fully hide the markings of a childhood accident that had left her with deep, uneven lines across her cheek and brow. Yet, her eyes shone with lingering optimism as she stepped toward the church's creaking wooden door, each step laden with both apprehension and the fragile promise of a new beginning. As the congregation gathered inside the modest stone-walled sanctuary, murmurs filled the air like drifting dust. In the ornate pulpit that had witnessed many heartfelt sermons, Amos Reed, a local rancher known for his unyielding temper and rigid notions of propriety, stepped forward. With eyes as cold and sharp as a desert hawk, Amos scanned the small assembly and then turned toward Clara. It was in that agonizing moment, as the reverberations of his harsh words collided with the silence of the church, that the fate of the arranged marriage was sealed. "Clara," Amos declared, his voice echoing off the dark wood, "you are nothing more than a burden, a blemish upon the promise of this union. A man deserves beauty and strength, not the scars of misfortune." His words, brutal and unyielding, hung in the air like poison. The congregation recoiled, whispers erupting into a chorus of disapproval and pity, as Clara's hopeful gaze shattered into fragments of disbelief and despair. Heart pounding with humiliation and sorrow, Clara's legs carried her away from the harsh echoes of rejection. The cold words of Amos Reed clung to her like an unwelcome shroud as she burst out of the church doors into the blazing afternoon sun. Townsfolk watched with mixed pity and judgment, their murmurs trailing after her like remnants of a failed promise. She wandered along the dusty road, each step heavy with the weight of heartbreak. Tears mingled with the grime on her cheeks, and for every whispering gaze, Clara felt her hope erode beneath the relentless barbs of public scorn. The once warm embrace of her dreams now felt as distant as the horizon stretching out over the barren landscape of Sagebrush Hollow. In desperation, she sought refuge beyond the edge of town, away from prying eyes and the stinging cruelty of the congregation. In her flight, Clara followed a winding path that led her to the outskirts of Sagebrush Hollow, where the clamor of judgment faded into the solitude of the open plains. The landscape, a rugged mosaic of sun-cracked earth and scraggly sagebrush, seemed to mirror the desolation in her heart. As the late afternoon light slanted across the horizon, Clara's weary eyes caught sight of a modest building with smoke curling from its chimney, a blacksmith shop standing alone against a vast expanse. Summoning what little strength she had left, she approached the weathered doorway. Inside, the rhythmic pounding of metal on an anvil provided a stark contrast to the silence she had left behind. At the center of this small, smoky haven stood Jacob, a man whose callous hands and solemn eyes told a story of profound loss and unwavering solitude. Widowed and ostracized after being unjustly blamed for the tragic fire that claimed his wife, Jacob had long since retreated into the forge, his own wounds hidden beneath layers of hardened steel. The moment their eyes met, a silent recognition passed between them, a shared pain that transcended words. Though his expression was gruff, there was an unspoken tenderness in the setter's jaw as he noted the distress etched across Clara's face. Jacob cleared a space amid the scattered tools and glowing embers of his forge, his rough exterior momentarily softened in the presence of Clara's anguished eyes. "You look like you've been through hell," he grumbled, his voice a low rumble against the clanging chorus of metal. Without another word, he gestured to a narrow staircase leading to a small loft huddled above the busy workshop. Though his manner was brusque, Jacob's eyes betrayed a quiet empathy, a silent acknowledgement of shared scars. Clara hesitated at first, her trembling hand clutching the hem of her dress as she considered the possibility of solace in a stranger's refuge. Yet the stark loneliness of the open plains and the cruel laughter of the day compelled her to accept the unspoken invitation. Climbing the creaking steps, she felt every joint in her body protest the sudden movement, but her resolve steeled her determination. In the cramped loft, the sparse furnishings and the faint, persistent odor of burning coal combined to create a space that was at once humble and comforting. There, illuminated by the soft glow of a single oil lamp, Clara allowed herself a brief moment of respite, her eyes closing as she struggled to steady her rapid breathing. Within the secluded loft, Clara's mind danced between hope and sorrow. She gazed out through a narrow, grimy window where the faded landscape of Sagebrush Hollow stretched into endless twilight. The gentle glow of the lamp played upon the rough wooden boards, casting shifting shadows that seemed to echo her uncertain future. In that quiet, suspended moment, memories of happier times mingled with the bitterness of recent rejection. She held close the remnants of her fragile dream, imagining a life unburdened by scorn, where a kind soul might see the beauty beyond her scars. The silence of night offered no reprieve, yet it bore the promise of solace, as if the darkness itself whispered of new beginnings. A quiet hope shimmered amidst her solitary, weary heart. Just as Clara began to drift into a light, uneasy sleep, a sound in the distance snapped her back to alertness. Faint, rhythmic hoofbeats echoed across the cool night air, rising in cadence as if heralding an approaching presence. The soft thudding seemed to penetrate the fragile walls of the loft, its eerie notes stirring a mixture of dread and anticipation within her. Her heart skipped a beat as she sat up, straining to listen to the sound that grew steadily louder with each passing moment. Who might ride through the darkness on this desolate night, and what did their arrival portend? Outside, the wind whispered secrets along the barren plains, carried with it the promise of change or forewarning of further sorrow. In that charged silence, as the echo of hoofbeats multiplied in the distance, Clara's mind raced with questions she could not yet answer. Trembling, she clutched the fabric of her dress as a chill spread through her, a prelude to either salvation or yet another torment. The uncertain sound of approaching hooves left her with one haunting thought, lingering in the cold air. Some scars, she realized, are not only visible, they can call forth the past in unexpected ways. The night pressed heavily upon Jacob's blacksmith shop as the final echoes of the distant hoofbeats faded into an uneasy silence. In the dim glow of an oil lamp swinging above a scarred workbench, Jacob's rugged face was drawn tight with concern. Not long before, the sound of pounding hooves had shattered the fragile calm of the workshop. Now, as quiet resumed its watch over the tools and embers, both Jacob and the hidden Clara braced themselves. Every creak of the timbers and every whisper of wind outside set their nerves on edge, reminders that on these barren lands, even a law's soft footfalls could spell ruin. Moments ago, the uneasy thrum of hoofbeats had announced the arrival of Deputy Hank, a lone rider whose weary gaze and weathered hat bespoke a life tempered by harsh frontier truths. Lantern in hand, the deputy had come seeking a scarred woman reported for theft, a charge born of twisted rumors and old grudges that had long clung to the edges of Sagebrush Hollow. Without a moment's hesitation, Jacob's protective instincts surged, and he hastily guided Clara into the cramped loft behind a stack of battered crates. In the cramped space, the stale air was thick with tension as Clara's shallow breathing mingled with the soft clatter of tools on the ground. Huddled behind the splintered crates, she pressed herself tight, her heart thundering like distant galloping hooves, while outside the deputy's lantern light sliced through the dark, searching every shadow. Deputy Hank's measured steps echoed across the worn wooden floor as he moved cautiously among scattered tools and charred scraps of metal. The beam of his lantern danced along the walls, illuminating the rough-hewn surfaces of the shop and throwing long, quivering shadows into hidden corners. For several long minutes, his eyes darted from crate to crate, as though expecting the mysterious, scarred woman to emerge at any moment. From his vantage point near the forge, Jacob felt his heart pounding furiously. Every sound, a creaking nail, the soft hum of the wind, fueled his quiet dread that the deputy might uncover what they so desperately tried to hide. With a slow, deliberate glance, Deputy Hank paused just by the door to the loft. The lantern's light swung low across the threshold, and for a heart-stopping instant, it seemed to search the very soul of the space where Clara had concealed herself. Then, with a low grunt of dissatisfaction and a bitter mutter about nonsense and rumors, the deputy retraced his steps. The echo of his departing hooves rolled away into the starlit distance. An almost palpable sigh of relief settled over the shop. Jacob allowed himself a brief moment to steady his shaking hands before emerging cautiously from behind his hiding place. His eyes, still alert and scanning the darkened corners, soon found Clara's timid form as she slipped quietly from the loft. The quiet now that replaced the deputy's intrusive light was fragile, a brief reprieve that would not last long in a place where the past and prejudice walked hand in hand. Once the threat had passed, Jacob led Clara toward the roaring heart of the shop, the forge. Its radiant glow bathed the room in flickering amber light, and the steady beat of his hammer on the anvil provided a measured, almost hypnotic rhythm. Amid the scattered tools and day-old soot, a broken plow blade lay on a rough-hewn work table. Its jagged edge was a symbol not just of decay, but of what might be rebuilt if given careful attention. "I reckon it's time we fix what's been broken," Jacob said softly, his gravelly voice low with unexpected tenderness. Clara hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Despite the fear lurking in her eyes, she extended a steady hand toward the cold iron. Her fingers, though trembling ever so slightly, betrayed a familiarity with tools, a skill inherited from long ago days spent at her father's bench, when hope was as common as a sunrise. Together, beneath the steady glow of the forge and the occasional burst of sparks from Jacob's determined strikes, the pair set about mending the broken blade. Every measured blow of the hammer, every careful filing of metal, echoed a quiet determination to mend more than just a piece of farm equipment. The rhythmic clanging of metal on iron blended with murmurs of remembrance and the soft, unspoken music of two lives seeking redemption. "I've seen a lot of hurt in these parts," Jacob murmured as he worked, pausing with the hammer raised. His eyes, lined with scars of loss and regret, met Clara's shimmering gaze. "Sometimes it feels like the very land is scarred by our misfortunes. But fixing a blade, like mending a heart, takes time and trust." Clara's reply was a soft whisper, yet the weight of her words filled the steaming air. "Scars don't make you a thief, but they can make you a target," she said, her voice steady though edged with sorrow. In that moment, as the sparks danced around them like fleeting stars, her words resonated, an echo of the pain she'd borne all her life. It was the first time she had unveiled even a part of her hidden past, and in doing so, she bridged the silence between them with both remorse and fierce defiance. At the forge, as the mended plow blade began to take shape, time seemed to slow. The rhythmic tapping of Jacob's hammer was joined by the steady pull of Clara's breath, and together, the sound forged an unspoken promise. Loss and rejection had once isolated them in a world that scorned the different and the damaged. Now, amid the glow of molten metal and the shared endeavor of repair, two wounded souls began to glimpse the possibility of salvation, not solely in bandages for body, but in the unity of broken hearts. The soft hum of the furnace, the scent of burning coal, and the occasional gleam of a newly formed edge wove a tapestry of connection that defied the cruel judgments of Sagebrush Hollow. The gentle intimacy of that shared labor gave way to a moment of quiet confession. Leaning against the warm metal of the workbench, Jacob, his voice husky with old grief, began to recount the night that changed his life forever. He told of a raging fire that had consumed his modest homestead and claimed the life of his beloved wife, a tragedy for which the town had shifted all blame upon his weary shoulders. His words trembled with the weight of guilt and sorrow, each syllable a painful admission that left him hollowed and shunned. Clara listened intently, her eyes mirroring the depths of her own hidden anguish. In the soft glow of the forge, her past came hauntingly to mind, the accident that had marred her face and the loneliness that had forced her to vanish from a world she no longer trusted. After a long pause, as the final sparks from the anvil faded into the gentle dark, Clara lifted her gaze and hesitated before speaking. Her voice, though low and tentative, carried an urgency born of endless nights on the run. "My scars, they didn't always define who I am," she began slowly. "When I was a little girl, a lantern tipped over in our homestead and set fire to everything I knew. It left me with these marks and made me an outcast in a world that fears trouble." Her words fell into the charged silence like soft rainfall. Then, almost as if summoning all the courage within her, Clara continued, "I'm not a thief, Jacob, but I've been running for a long time, and not just from hunger. There's more to my past than you know, things I'm not ready to share fully just yet." Her confession, fragile yet fierce, left a weighty hush in its wake. Jacob's eyes softened as he considered her admission. The fire's glow danced across his weathered features, and in that warm light there flickered hope, a promise that even the deepest wounds could one day be healed. "We all run from something in this life," he said quietly, the sound of his voice melding with the clang of softened metal. "Sometimes what we flee from is not what truly haunts us, but what we're too afraid to face." His words, sincere and resonant, lingered in the charged air between them. Clara's heart pounded as she absorbed his response. In that intimate space, the forge's heat seemed to mend more than broken metal. It began to stitch together frayed fragments of trust. Yet, even as a tentative bond blossomed, the mysteries of her past waited in the shadows, unresolved and beckoning. Her eyes dropped, and with a trembling sigh she repeated, "I'm not a thief, Jacob, but I've been running for a long time, and not just from hunger." The lingering cadence of her confession left both Jacob and the silent watching night with many questions still unanswered. A fragile, unspoken promise of healing and change hovered in the dim light of the forge as they stood together, each awash in a glow of shared pain and budding hope. "Scars don't make you a thief, but they can make you a target," Clara whispered again, a quiet mantra meant both for herself and the man who had helped mend more than just a broken blade. Even as the night deepened and the memory of the deputy's lantern slowly faded, the weight of her secret pressed upon her heart, a secret that would shape the path ahead, leaving Jacob and all who listened to their quiet exchange wondering what truth still lay hidden in the shadows of her past. Dawn's first light crept over the horizon, splashing pale gold and crimson across the rugged plains surrounding the blacksmith shop. The previous night's tension still clung to the air like a stubborn haze, and in the cool gray of early morning, the shop's worn timbers groaned beneath the weight of an uneasy promise. Jacob, already alert from a restless night, sat by the glowing embers of the forge, lost in silent contemplation. Outside, the chill wind carried whispers of danger and regret alike. Before long, the sound of approaching hooves shattered the fragile peace. The clatter grew louder, echoing ominously in the empty space. Jacob's eyes, narrowed in apprehension, darted to the front door as it swung open. In stepped Deputy Hank once again, his weathered face set in a stern expression. But he was not alone this time. Trailing close behind was a lean, rugged bounty hunter with eyes as hard as flint and a reputation that preceded him. A man whose presence spoke of relentless pursuit and frontier justice gone awry. Deputy Hank's voice cut through the cool morning air, laced with a mix of authority and suspicion. "Jacob, we got trouble stirring. There's word that the scarred woman is wanted well beyond petty theft. They say she's involved in a larger crime, a dispute with a corrupt merchant who's been framing folks to hide his own misdeeds." His gaze swept the room sharply, lingering on the crates stacked in the dim loft overhead, where Clara had taken refuge the night before. The bounty hunter stepped forward, his spurs jangling with each deliberate step. "We've received reports, and I reckon it's time we confirm the truth. Open up the shop and let us search every corner." His tone was cold, leaving no room for argument. The air crackled with tension as the men exchanged silent, measured looks. Jacob's jaw tightened, his protective instincts ignited like the flames sputtering in the forge. "Now! I won't be complicit in your false claims," Jacob growled, his voice low and unyielding. "This here shop is private property, and if any harm comes to the one I shelter, you'll answer to me." His gaze was unwavering, and beneath its stern mien lay an unspoken promise of resistance. Deputy Hank shifted his weight and replied cautiously, "We have orders, Jacob. The woman in question is being sought for theft and worse. Accusations that stem from a long, twisted tale of deceit. We just want to ensure that justice is served." The bounty hunter's eyes glinted as he studied Jacob's resolute stance, his hand resting on the pommel of his worn revolver. With a measured step, he advanced toward the door that led to the loft. Inside that cramped space, hidden amidst shadowed crates in the dim light of a single oil lamp, Clara's breathing had been shallow with fear. The memory of the previous night's whispered confessions mixed with the present dread as she listened to the gruff voices below. Anxiety coiled in her stomach like a living thing, and she huddled in the corner, praying her presence would remain unknown. But fate, as it often does in the harsh frontier, had its own designs. Driven by a surge of desperation and an instinctive desire to help, Clara rose silently from her hiding place. With trembling fingers and a heart pounding in her ears, she carefully nudged a stack of metal tools that had been piled near the loft's exit. The clatter was sudden and jarring, a sharp interruption that broke the tense stillness. The sound echoed down the narrow stairway, and for an instant, the bounty hunter's attention snapped toward the noise. Jacob, who had been standing equidistant between duty and the duty of care, heard the crash and immediately seized his chance. "That's it," he bellowed, storming toward the doorway with eyes blazing. "You best be on your way. This ain't the place for your kind of trouble." His voice, both a command and a warning, reverberated around the room, and Deputy Hank, taken aback by the sudden disruption, exchanged a confused glance with the bounty hunter. For a moment, silence reigned as the two outsiders assessed the situation. The bounty hunter, now visibly irritated by the unexpected distraction, narrowed his eyes and barked, "You've been warned. We'll be watching these parts closely, Jacob." His tone left no room for negotiation as he and Deputy Hank turned and strode out the door, their departure marked by the distant clatter of hooves receding into the early morn. Once the intruder's steps faded into the distance, Jacob's tense shoulders finally relaxed. Heart still pounding, he returned to the forge, with a soft pulsating glow of dying embers welcomed him back. A heavy silence settled as he cautiously ascended the narrow stairs to the loft. There, he found Clara waiting with a mixture of fear and relief in her eyes, a vulnerability that softened his rugged features. In the quiet aftermath, as the first full rays of sunlight filtered into the grimy window, Jacob motioned for Clara to join him by the roaring fire of the forge. The heat and light seemed to push back the shadows of distrust and fear, if only for a moment. The rhythmic clanging of the hammer from earlier was now replaced by a comforting crackle and the murmur of quiet voices, sharing their burdens in hushed tones, with the forge's gentle warmth enveloping them. Jacob set aside the tools he'd been using and turned his gaze upon Clara. The flickering light danced across her scarred face, highlighting every line and blemish as though they were testaments to survival. "You know," he began slowly, his voice barely above the rust of the fire, "I've seen many things in my long days of labor at this anvil, but it takes a strong spirit to weather the storm of your past, and your scars tell a story of strength, not shame." Clara's eyes widened as she absorbed the weight of his words. In that raw, unguarded moment, her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Jacob continued, his tone gentle yet firm. "Beauty ain't in hiding. It's in standing tall, even when the world tries to break you. You're beautiful, not despite your scars, but because of everything you've endured." His declaration, earnest and filled with a tenderness he had long hidden behind a hardened exterior, struck Clara with the force of a revelation. Never before had someone look upon her so, seeing raw worth where others had only seen damage. The air in the forge grew thick with an unspoken promise as the two sat side by side, their faces lit by both the gentle glow of the fire and the weight of their shared truths. They spoke in low voices of lost dreams, betrayals, and the constant battle against judgment in a harsh, unforgiving world. Each word poured forth like molten metal, forging a bond from the broken remnants of their pasts. Clara recounted snippets of her childhood, The accident that had marked her forever, the loneliness that had driven her to run, and the painful secret that had forced her into a life on the run. Jacob listened with solemn empathy, his own memories of guilt and isolation echoing in the shadows of the shop. It was in these quiet confessions, beneath the unyielding heat of the forge, that the possibility of redemption began to kindle. Yet even amid the burgeoning hope, an undercurrent of danger still lurked. As they allowed themselves a moment of fragile peace, Jacob's gaze drifted toward the dusty window. Dawn broke over Sagebrush Hollow with a cold, relentless clarity. Pale light spilled to the grimy glass of the blacksmith shop and glinted off scattered tools and smudged anvils. The embers of the forge, now only a faint red glow, struggled against the encroaching chill. Jacob had scarcely recovered from the previous night's tumult when the heavy sound of approaching hoofs shattered the fragile morning peace. Moments later, the door banged open with decisive force. There, silhouetted against the newborn light, stood the bounty hunter, a lean figure with unyielding eyes and a sneer that spoke of personal vendettas. At his side, Deputy Hank's expression was troubled but subdued. His duty, it seemed, was now clouded by orders that betrayed no kindness. The bounty hunter stepped forward slowly, the clink of his spurs resonating in the silent space. "Jacob," he called, his voice rough as gravel and tinged with loathing. "I've come to settle the score. The officer tells me that the scarred woman you hide here is guilty of theft, and of a greater crime against a corrupt merchant who forged charges to cover his misdeeds. Now, it's time you hand her over." Jacob's eyes flashed as he squared his broad shoulders, his grip tightening on a heavy iron tool. "I'll not allow you to trample on the innocent any further," he replied, his tone low and resolute. "That accusation is a lie born of greed and revenge, and you will not drag innocence into your mess." The bounty hunter's lip curled in disdain as he took a deliberate step closer. "Tell me then, Jacob, what part of the truth do you hide? Your reluctant protector has been sheltering a woman whose past speaks of betrayal. It is not enough that a merchant has framed her, but that she ran when the heat turned too close. Now you must choose, stand aside and let justice have its way, or face the consequences." Inside the cramped loft above, Clara pressed herself closer to the far wall. Her heart pounded in her ears as her mind raced to reckon with the bounty hunter's words. She had known that the truth of her past, the shame and guilt that clung to her like the dust on her face, might one day catch up with her. Yet the sound of that accusation, so stark in public, was almost too much to bear. She took a trembling breath, reminding herself of the life she had fled. A life stained by false charges and a cruel twist of fate. Now, with danger so near, every secret seemed poised to burst forth. Jacob's gaze slid from the bounty hunter to the darkened entrance of the loft, sensing the silent plea from within. "I won't let you search my shop or drag her away," he declared firmly. "If you're after the truth, you'll have to come through me first." His voice boomed in the quiet morning, echoing off the stone and wood. The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed in a fierce glare as he replied, "You think you can shield her from her past? That past is not so easily erased. She stole from a merchant, a man of considerable means, and now the law is bleeding for retribution." For a long moment, the air was thick with unspoken threats. Deputy Hank shifted his weight, and the bounty hunter's gaze swept the room. Every tool, every scrap of metal seemed charged with imminent conflict. Finally, the bounty hunter grunted, "Time is short. I'll give you a chance to save face, Jacob. Turn her over willingly or we'll take her by force." His tone held a cold promise of violence that sent a shiver down Jacob's spine. Without waiting for a reply, Jacob took a step back and then, in one swift motion, grabbed Clara by her hand. "We're not finished here," he said. "Listen, if you value your life at all, you'll come with me." The bounty hunter's scowl deepened, and, with a final threatening glance at Deputy Hank, he strode out the door with his companion. The sound of their retreating hooves faded into the distance, leaving behind a lingering tension that filled the shop like an unwanted specter. "Come on," Jacob urged in a low, urgent whisper. "We can't risk staying here." That no-good varmint isn't finished yet. With no time to lose, Jacob led Clara past the shop's back door and out into the harsh light of the awakening day. Their steps were quick and desperate as they made their way toward a narrow trail that led into canyon, a rugged, barren expanse with jagged cliffs and hidden paths known only to those who had long roamed these wild lands. The canyon, shrouded in early morning mist and framed by ancient stone, was a natural refuge from the prying eyes of men with vendettas. Jacob and Clara hurried along the dusty trail, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the canyon walls. The air here was cooler, scented with sagebrush and the faint tang of mineral-rich water seeping from rocky crevices. Every step was a calculated risk, as they navigated treacherous turns and uneven ground, all the while aware that the bounty hunters' keen eyes might still be tracking their trail. Their escape was filled with both palpable tension and quiet determination. Jacob led the way, his instincts honed from years on frontier, while Clara lagged slightly behind, her eyes darting nervously over every shadow and crevice. At times, the canyon's walls towered overhead, enclosing them in a silent, stone embrace that offered both beauty and peril. Despite the danger, each rocky turn and narrow ledge served as a reminder of the rugged resilience that defined their lives on this unforgiving land. After a grueling trek through the canyon's winding passageways, the pair finally reached a secluded area where a hidden spring burbled quietly from beneath a cluster of weathered boulders. The spring's crystal waters shimmered faintly in the early sunlight, offering a momentary sanctuary from the relentless pursuit. Exhausted and drenched in dust, Jacob and Clara collapsed onto a flat rock near the water's edge, their chests heaving as they attempted to catch their breath. The distant sound of the forge had been replaced by the gentle gurgle of the spring and the hushed whisper of the wind through narrow rock formations. In the soft glow of this hidden oasis, the tension of the chase gave way to a fragile intimacy. After several prolonged moments of silence, Clara's eyes, still wary but filled with a quiet strength, searched Jacob's face. I need you to know everything," she murmured, her voice trembling in the stillness. The sound of the spring lapping against the rock seemed to encourage her as she continued. "I wasn't always on the run for nothing. The merchant, he made advances I never wanted, and when I refused him, he framed me for stealing. I lost everything that day, my family, my home. I was forced to flee into the wilderness with nothing but the scars on my face and the shame in my heart." Her words, raw and laden with sorrow, fell softly into the cool air. "I've been running for so long, Jacob, believing I was nothing more than a criminal. But there's more to it than that." Jacob's rugged features softened as he listened, the flicker of the hidden spring's water mirroring the emotions in his steely blue eyes. "Some scars run deep in the canyon. We carry them in our hearts," he replied quietly, his voice thick with regret. "I lost my beloved wife to the flames of a fire I couldn't prevent, and I've carried that guilt ever since. I know what it feels like to be pursued by the ghosts of the past." His hand reached out gently, brushing away a thin layer of dust from her cheek. "You are not defined by your scars, Clara. Your pain, your courage, they make you who you are. And I see the beauty in that, even when the world cannot." Their shared admissions forged an unspoken bond amidst the isolation. For a long while, they sat in the embrace of the canyon, allowing the calm of the spring to soothe the scars that both history and circumstance had etched upon them. The gentle murmur of the water and the distant cry of an eagle overhead created a fragile cocoon of safety, a temporary refuge from the harsh judgments of the outside world. But the peace was as delicate as the mist that veiled the canyon's edges. Just when hope began to blossom between them, a tense rustling broke the silence. Jacob's eyes snapped open as he peered into the distance, towards a canyon rim. A shape, scarcely visible at first, had emerged in the pale light, a figure creeping along the ridge with deliberate, predatory caution. Before either could react, a sharp crack shattered the fragile calm, a gunshot echoing thunderously off the canyon walls. Time seemed to freeze as the recoil of that single, fatal sound reverberated through the rocky passage, leaving behind a silence filled with dread and uncertainty. In that charged moment, Jacob and Clara exchanged panicked glances, their intertwined fates suspended on the precipice of violence. Who had fired the shot? And who would be the next to fall prey to the relentless pursuit of a past that refused to let go? The canyon's ominous embrace held its breath as the echo of the gunshot faded into the vast, uncaring desert. Beauty ain't in hiding. It's in standing tall, Jacob had once declared, but now the truth of that statement trembled in the air as danger drew near. With hearts pounding in unison, they prepared to face whatever consequence the rising threat might bring, uncertain whether the coming moment would bind them ever closer, or tear them apart forever. The echo of the gunshot still reverberated off the canyon walls as the initial chaos subsided. Jacob's arm throbbed painfully where the bullet had grazed him, but determination shone in his eyes as he helped Clara move deeper into the shelter of the rocky outcroppings. They scrambled among the boulders until they found refuge in a small alcove near a hidden spring, its cool waters murmuring softly in the early dawn. Gasping for breath between desperate steps, they collapsed on a flat stone, the spring's gentle trickle offering a brief respite from the danger. Clara knelt beside Jacob and, with steady, tender hands, carefully cleaned and bound his wound using a strip of cloth torn from her own dress. Every measured motion spoke of a fierce protectiveness and a blossoming bond, a promise that even the sharpest pain might one day yield healing. As the first light of day crept over jagged cliffs and painted the canyon in hues of pale gold and crimson, the two survivors gathered their strength, though Jacob's wound pulsed with each step. He and Clara resolved to return to the familiar safety of the blacksmith shop. The canyon's narrow passages, though treacherous with uneven stone and hidden crevices, became a path toward hope as the pair moved as one. In the stillness of the rocky labyrinth, their footsteps echoed in unison, a quiet testament that together they could overcome the shadows of a condemned past. Back in Sagebrush Hollow, a restless transformation was stirring. Deputy Hank, now burdened by remorse for his earlier harshness, had returned to the town with evidence that began to crumble the corrupt merchant's vile claims. Rumors that had festooned Clara's reputation with unjust accusations were replaced by murmurs of truth and vindication. The townsfolk, long wary of outsiders and misfortune alike, found their hearts soften as they learned that the merchant had used his power to frame an innocent woman simply for defying his predatory advances. In quiet gatherings at dusty general stores and under the fading light of oil lamps, they rallied together in a common cause, led by a penitent Deputy Hank and emboldened by community resolve. The citizens confronted the bounty hunter whose relentless pursuit had once threatened Clara's very life. In a display of frontier justice tempered by compassion, the nefarious pursuer was driven out of town, and with him, the lingering stain of false blame was washed away. With renewed hope, Jacob and Clara made their way back to the blacksmith shop, a place once revered for its clanging rhythm and steady forge, now transformed by the town's redemptive spirit. The sturdy building, scarred by years of labor and hardship, stood as a silent guardian of second chances. As the pair entered through the creaking door, they were met by gentle murmurs and approving nods from neighbors whose eyes shone with kindness. The very air seemed to glisten with promise as the community's newfound unity erased the old whispers of shame and misunderstanding. In that elevated moment, Clara's name was cleared and the once ostracized bride-to-be transcended her painful past to become a shining symbol of resilience and hope. As preparations unfolded, a modest wedding ceremony was arranged within the humble sanctuary of the shop. Beneath the steady, forgiving light of the forge's embers, a simple altar was set with wildflowers and a homespun banner. A small congregation of townsfolk gathered, a few weathered faces that had witnessed seasons of hardship and redemption, each drawn together by the desire for justice and the celebration of true love. In the center of it all, Jacob and Clara stood side by side. The steady clanging of the anvil provided a rhythmic counterpoint as Jacob cleared his throat and spoke in a voice both firm and tender. "I promise to protect and cherish you, not despite your scars, but because every mark tells the story of your perseverance. In you, I see a beauty that no cruelty can ever diminish." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she replied softly, "In your arms, I have found the strength to heal and the hope to embrace a future unburdened by the past." Their vows, spoken with simple sincerity, sent ripples of warmth through the room, as if the very glow of the forge had been kindled anew. In that sacred moment, their union became a beacon, a testament to the power of love to transform even the darkest scars into symbols of triumph. After the ceremony, as the festive quiet settled over the shop, Clara's gaze fell upon a worn envelope resting atop a dusty table near the glowing forge. Its paper was yellowed and soft, edged by the passage of time, and it bore her name in an elegant, familiar script. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The careful lines of the handwritten words revealed the message of her estranged brother. "I heard you're alive. I'm coming to find you. Forgive the past, for our bond remains eternal. Soon we will be reunited." The revelation sent a tremor of bittersweet hope through Clara's heart. Though the wounds of abandonment and betrayal had once seemed insurmountable, this letter promised a possibility of familial reconciliation and a chance to reclaim a lost part of herself. In the days that followed, Jacob and Clara embraced their new life with quiet determination and tender care. The blacksmith shop, with its sturdy timbers and ever-glowing forge, became a home not only for their work, but also for healing and shared dreams. Neighbors passed by with gentle smiles and murmurs of encouragement, each small kindness a reminder that their community, scarred by its own trials, now understood the true essence of justice and compassion. Over time, as the harsh edges of their past faded like morning mist, Jacob and Clara found that even the deepest wounds could be mended. They discovered that love, steady and resilient, was the greatest remedy of all. One cool, clear evening as the sun dipped behind the rugged horizon and the smoke from the forge danced against the twilight, Jacob and Clara sat side by side outdoors. Jacob squeezed Clara's hand gently and murmured, "Some scars heal with time, others with love." In that simple statement lay the culmination of their journey. Pain transformed into strength, isolation replaced by unity, and a future now brimming with possibility. Yet even as life began to settle into this newfound peace, a quiet thread of uncertainty remained. The letter from Clara's brother had promised a reunion, a chance to face the past once more. Though the promise filled Clara with both hope and trepidation, she resolved that whatever the future held, she would face it with courage and the steadfast love of the man beside her. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment about what you do next and subscribe for more Wild West tales.